Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, I, along with the rest of the Senate, look forward to going through the process with Brett Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh is an exceptionally qualified judge, as he has been described a judge of judges. He is one that judges look at around the country to be able to see what he is writing, what his opinions have noted. In fact, the Supreme Court historically has also looked at his opinions on the Circuit Court and has taken high notice of those and have quoted several of his opinions verbatim in Supreme Court opinions. This person has had a lot of respect for what he has done and how he has done it in the process. And I enjoyed getting a chance to be able to meet his family and to be able to introduce to not only his personal faith, but his passion for people and his work with the homeless and other things that he's done for so many years. So this will be an interesting process that we'll see, and over the next 2 months or so, this body should do as we have done before, that we did with Justice Gorsuch, that was done with Sotomayor in the past. About 66 days for each of those to be able to work through the nomination process all the way until we actually get to final vote. So we'll see how this goes in the days ahead. Now we'll look forward to getting a chance to visit with Judge Kavanaugh in my office in the days ahead to be able to ask him specific questions. I'm reserving any kind of judgment on him until I have the opportunity to be able to visit with him personally and to be able to finish going through all the opinions that he's written. But he seems like an exceptional candidate, and I look forward to being able to walk through this process judiciously. Mr. President, I did want to be able to mention today, though, and to step back a little bit from the immigration conversation. There are a lot of issues with immigration that we deal with on a regular basis, but it's more conversation than it is solutions. And it's been my great frustration that we talk about H-2B visas, refugees and asylum. We talk about overstaying visas, temporary protected status. We talk about illegal entry. We talk about quotas and diversity lottery, families. But we don't ever seem to resolve the issue. We talk about it. And the great frustration is many of the issues that we deal with right now on immigration are a direct result of Congress not fixing the issue. My encouragement to this body is to stop pointing the finger at the president and to ask a very simple question. Why is there conversation about a zero-tolerance policy, and what does that really mean? Well, in its most simple form, I think we could agree that if someone illegally crosses the American border into the country, they should be stopped and at least asked, who are you? Why are you here? Because in the last year, 1.1 million people became legal citizens of the United States. They made legal application, worked through that process, received a green card, were evaluated with background checks, and became citizens of the United States. 1.1 million. Today, on the southern border between Mexico and the United States, there will be 500,000 legal crossings into the United States. Legal crossings, 500,000 today. So the question is, for individuals that illegally cross the border, should we stop those individuals and ask, who are you? What are you doing here? Why are you crossing into the country? Because not every person crossing into the country is just crossing in for work that we would consider good work. Today, U.S. Customs and Border Protection released out just an announcement. Now, this was just today that this was released out, that the officers referred a 38-year-old male for further inspection as he crossed into the United States. Following a positive alert from a canine unit, officers seized 21 pounds of cocaine from the vehicle's firewall. Today. Not everyone who's entering into the country is coming in for a legal reason. Not everyone who's crossing our border is coming just to work. So the zero tolerance policy is really a question of, should we stop individuals and be able to evaluate someone who's illegally crossing the border, not one of the 500,000 people today that will legally cross the border, but if you're one of those other individuals that's not crossing the border legally, should we stop you and should we prosecute you? Previous administrations have used what they call prosecutorial discretion. They've taken folks in and they've released them into the country and determined who to prosecute and who to not prosecute. This administration has stepped up and said, let's take a moment that we're going to prosecute everyone and try to be able to slow down the process. But there's been a noticeable increase in something that a lot of people have not noticed. That is the number of families coming across the border. Why would that be? It's not just individuals crossing the border as a family, it's individuals that are bringing children with them to cross the border because they're treated differently over the past several years. Over the first 5 months of this fiscal year, there's a 315% increase in apprehensions of groups fraudulently claiming to be families. Let me run that past you again. This year, in the last 5 months, there's been a 315% increase in apprehensions of groups that fraudulently claim to be families. Not a 315% increase in families. These are smugglers that bring a child with them because they know if you bring a child with you, then you are treated differently in the border. Historically, you've been released. This administration has said to stop this, we're going to start prosecuting and try to figure out who is actually a family, who is not a family, and to be able to figure out how to be able to prosecute this, because there has been such a dramatic change. Now, the numbers are just increasing for family units, period, that are coming. Let me run some of the numbers past you. According to Customs and Border Patrol, there's a 407% increase in the number of family units detained in June of 2018 as compared to June of 2017. In May, it was a 600% increase. In April, it was an 863% increase. We're seeing a dramatic shift in the number of units that are coming at us. No matter your view on immigration reform, increases of this kind of magnitude should cause us to be able to slow down and be able to ask some very simple questions. Are the loopholes in our law and the prosecutorial discretion to be able to release families to be able to show up later for a hearing, is that causing more individuals to be able to pretend to be families or more families to be able to come? I think it's causing more and more individuals to be able to come that are coming not as a family unit, but that are coming pretending to be a family unit, though we also have, obviously, family units that are coming as well. A key issue that we need to be able to address is pretty straightforward. Of the 1 million plus people that come here legally, should we have greater respect for those individuals that have gone through the legal process? I believe that we should. In fact, I had a small town hall meeting in Lawton, Oklahoma, just last week. And there were lots of questions about keeping families together, which I am one of those individuals that says, as often as we possibly can, the default position should be keeping families together. But for those individuals that were there at this meeting in Lawton, all the questions were about what are we doing in immigration, how are we handling this, how are we prosecuting, and are we treating people humanely? Rightfully so, those are reasonable questions for us as Americans. But at the very end of the town hall meeting, one gentleman asked me, what about legal immigration? And he asked it in a very specific way. Are there issues we should deal with that? Well, I followed up with him and said, why do you ask that? The reason he asked that is because he is a legal immigrant going through the process and is in his final stages. In fact, just the week before, he had received his green card. And he's a little frustrated with people that are treated differently that came into the country illegally versus people that are actually doing it the right way. It's been interesting to me to be able to watch this whole movement about abolishing ICE and saying maybe we shouldn't have ICE enforcement at all, no immigration and customs enforcement at all. Surprisingly, the entity that was created after 9/11, because the 9/11 terrorists were individuals that came into the country and overstayed their visas, and they were not stopped. So ICE was created to help us with our immigration enforcement because we had just been penetrated by a group of individuals that were terrorists and killed thousands of Americans. Now, after that was created in 2003, now there's this big movement as if we have lost all that we have learned since 2001. That now there's a whole group saying maybe we just need to abolish ICE entirely. Let me just run through a few things on that. ICE last year seized 2,370 pounds of fentanyl. 2,370 pounds of fentanyl. Now that may not seem like a lot to do just over a ton of fentanyl that they seized, but according to the DEA, 2 milligrams of fentanyl is a deadly amount of fentanyl to be able to take in. Fentanyl is laced into heroin or into cocaine to dramatically increase the high. But if you have up to 2 milligrams of it, it's not going to increase your high, it'll kill you. That amount of fentanyl that ICE seized last year is a deadly dosage amount for just over 537 million people. 537 million people could have been killed with just the amount of fentanyl that ICE seized last year. On top of that, ICE agents seized almost 7,000 pounds of heroin, and a total of 1 million pounds of narcotics were seized just in 2017. We also know that ICE freed 518 victims of human trafficking. They freed 904 children from child exploitation. They picked up 800 MS-13 gang members as an arrest, and almost 5,000 total members of gang members were taken off the street just by ICE. We hear a lot about ICE raids, as if ICE is wandering around neighborhoods looking to be able to pick people up. But I'd like to remind folks, the majority of what ICE does is at the border, detaining individuals. In fact, last year, ICE agents removed 62,913 more people who were detained at the border than were arrested at the United States. ICE agents are law enforcement. They're enforcing the law of our country. And it's quite remarkable to me to be able to hear people, some people even in this chamber, discuss with seriousness abolishing federal law enforcement that's taking human traffickers off the street, that's taking gang members off the street, that's taking lethal doses of fentanyl off the street, that's taking tons of narcotics off the street. Why don't we show them some respect? And if there are things that need to be done to be able to reform it, the ICE agents would be the first ones to step up to this body and to say, here are some ideas and some things that can be done to reform it. But abolishing ICE is a ticket to lawlessness in our country. As a reminder, the President asked Congress 21 days ago to enact legislation that would allow families to be able to stay together. 21 days ago, the President asked for that. This Congress has failed to act on that at all. As we all know, over the course of 1 month, roughly 2,000 children were separated from their parents and placed in HHS custody while the parent was referred to the Department of Justice for prosecution. A great deal of attention, rightfully so, has been focused on HHS to ensure that those children are reunited with their parents, especially those children who are under age 5. To do this, HHS has to first verify that that adult is actually the parent of that child. And as I mentioned before, just in the first 5 months of this fiscal year, 315% increase of family units coming in that pretended to be family units, but are really not family units. And I've heard a lot of criticism of saying, just put that adult back with that child again. This should be easy, but it's not that simple. Because many of those adults that came with that child are really not their parent. They were using them as a vehicle to be able to get easy access into the country. So what does that really look like? Well, let me give you a couple ideas on this. As we walk through the different numbers that are related to some of these children and how many of these children were connected or not connected with the adults that were with them, let me give you a few of these stats. Of those children that are 4 and under, 14 of those are not eligible for reunification because their parents have major issue, or those individuals claiming to be their parents. So let's just take just the people that we're claiming that are parents, that we know are parents. 8 of those parents had serious criminal history discovered when they did the background check, including child cruelty, narcotics and human trafficking. 1 had a warrant for murder and robbery. So as Americans, we're not reconnecting those 8. 5 adults were found that that's not the parent of the accompanying child at all. And these are of the children 4 and under. 1 of those individuals faced a credible evidence of child abuse in the process. We're not reconnecting those. And I hear a lot in the news from individuals saying every one of those folks needs to be reconnected as fast as possible. And I hear a lot of criticism saying they're doing DNA testing of these individuals. What they're trying to do is they're trying to figure out, is that adult really the parent of that child, or has that adult picked up a child somewhere through Mexico or Central America to be able to use them as a tool to be able to try to get into the United States? I only wish that wasn't happening. It is. Reconnecting families as families is a major priority. And I've said before and would say again, our default position should be keeping families together. But part of our struggle is determining who are the actual families that we can actually keep them together, and who are individuals that could very well do that child harm. So let's do this. Let's keep attention on the reunification of the families. Let's continue to ask very fair and reasonable questions of the administration as they're reconnecting these families. But let's also make sure that this Congress actually acts on the issues that need to be done with immigration. 21 days ago, there was a request to be able to deal with the issue of family reunification of this body, still not acted on. In February of this year, this body had a vote on dealing with what's called the Flores Settlement. That's what causes the separation of these families, a settlement that goes all the way back to 1997. Every single administration since 1997 has struggled with the Flores Settlement, because the Flores Settlement says if you arrest a family illegally entering the country, the children of that family can only be detained 20 days. That sounds reasonable, except it takes on average 35 days just to do a hearing. So with that settlement all the way back to 1997, every administration has said, I've either got to separate families or I've got to release that family into the country and hope that they show up for a court hearing at a future date. Oh, by the way, we called and checked on some of the future court dates. If you're in line to be able to get into a court date, if you're released into the country to come into the court date, the longest period of time that you'll wait, depending on the region you're headed to, is 4 years and 2 months from now is the next available date. So as a family unit, you're released into the country for 4 years, and then we hope you show up for your court date 4 years from now. This body knows all these numbers. And we've not acted to solve the problem. We need to address these issues. We need to be a country that continues to be open to legal immigration. We need to be a country that's open to work, even workers that cross the border both sides, north and south. We need to be a nation that deals with things like H-2B visas and asylum and refugees. We need to continue to keep the promise that we are a nation built on a set of values, an American dream, and to say if you want to come live under the law and live in a land of freedom where you can become anything that you want to become, you're welcome to be here if you come legally. We need to be that nation. But we also need to just not ignore illegal immigration and assume there aren't real problems with gang violence, with the movement of drugs, with human trafficking, with child trafficking, because they're real. Is it every family that comes across? Absolutely not. But are you okay with it happening at all? What if it's 1 in 10 that's child trafficking or that's drug smuggling? Is that an acceptable number? Or should we know the people that are crossing the border and know the issues that are there? We can do better than this. Let's solve this. Let's keep the debate going, and let's actually resolve this in the days ahead. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.